Barrow. Senator Fawcett.
Mr Acting Deputy President, thank you. I rise to address this motion from Senator Carr, and I do commend Senator Farrell for his enthusiasm and commitment to the mining sector in South Australia, but I must say I deplore the fact that such a serious issue as the South Australian economy, or this important issue of shipbuilding, which is an incredibly important part of our national security, should come down to such a cheap exchange of political barbs. Now, I would like to go to some of the issues of substance, but this is at the end of the day a political debate, so I shall start off by rebutting, just like a school debate, which is the level, unfortunately, that such debates often reach in this place. I will rebut, like a school debate, some of the errors and misconceptions that were put forward by Senator Farrell, and then I'd like to talk about some of the more concrete issues that this place, on both sides of the chamber, should be addressing in the interests of our national security and in the interests of the working men and women of South Australia. Senator Farrell made a number of comments there about this government and what it's done to the auto sector. I have stood in this place before, as have other members on this side, and talked about the fact that the demise of Ford and Toyota and Holden's has occurred over a number of years, and in fact most of those years were under the ALP government. Mike Devereaux, as the GM of Holden's, specifically made the comment that GM was now talking about sovereign risk in relation to Australia because of the bat-flicking of the Gillard government over policies, and when it came to the fact that they closed their doors, he made the very clear statement that no decision of the Australian government, no amount of cash, would have changed GM's position because they were in fact closing down factories around the world as part of their consolidation. The Productivity Commission has underpinned that. Steve Bracks has underpinned in terms of the volume of cars that have to be produced to make a plant economical. So can we put aside the cheap political barbs and trying to draw from that analogies on this issue of shipbuilding? When it comes to shipbuilding, and this is where I want to finish the political points just to contrast and compare the actual record of action, not the record of words and promises, but the record of action between the Coalition and the ALP. Senator Farrell made great mention about the air warfare destroyer project. That's C4000 Phase 3. And that project was signed up for, that was approved, that was planned, approved, funded by the Howard government, by the Coalition government. We've heard a lot of talk about Armidale patrol boats, C1444, again, Coalition government. Joint Project 2048, Phase 4A, the LHD, again, Coalition government. So in terms of the side of politics that actually commits to a program, doesn't just talk about it, doesn't just have aspirational white papers which it then fails to fund. If you look at the shipbuilding projects around Australia that are occurring today, they are because of decisions of the Howard government, which were 7 to 8 years ago. And I particularly make that point, Mr Acting Deputy President, to illustrate the time frame that is required for the venture the size of building a ship between the decision and commitment of funds and when you have people on a dockyard actually cutting, welding steel, integrating systems. It does not happen just overnight. The things that happen overnight are the defence acquisitions that come from offshore. And so again, it's worth looking, while we finish this little political segment, which we seem to have in this place, let's contrast the ALP's record. White Paper of 2009. Big dreams, 12 submarines, built in South Australia. All kinds of equipment that was promised. Within 6 months, in fact less than that, the ALP had started cutting the defence budget to the point where it is now at its lowest level since 1938. Not only did they have to defer those major acquisition projects, but they also cut funding out of the running system of the Defence Force, and Defence admitted in estimates recently that that has amounted to some $16 billion worth of expenditure which has been deferred, which means contracts they had for building renovations, training, equipment upgrades or maintenance, all of that has had to be deferred. And who suffers from that when those things are deferred? Defence industry. They are the people who were expecting to be doing those jobs, that work, and that's been deferred. So we see, on one hand, a lack of decision, C1000 promised in the 2009 White Paper, and yet no decision for 6 years. But it's interesting, Mr Acting Deputy President, when you do look at decisions that were made, and there were some decisions made, those decisions did not necessarily bring advantage to the very people that this motion is going on about. Let's look at JP 2048, Phase 3, in terms of the amphibious watercraft replacement. In September 2011, the then government made a decision on this project, and if you go back through the Capability Development Group and the Defence Material Organisation's papers, it is clear that this was put forward as a project that had every opportunity to be a manufactured and supported in Australia project. We are not talking rocket science here. These are the smaller landing craft that will operate to and from the landing helicopter docks, the LHD, the Canberra-class vessels. Okay, so these are not complex nor expensive ships, but they would have provided work. They could have been providing work right now over the next 2 or 3 years if the government had decided to do that. What did the ALP do? The ALP decided that they'd send the job to Spain. So now those 12 ships, one of the few things that the ALP actually made a decision on and committed money to, did they support Australian dock workers, manufacturing workers? No, they sent it to Spain. So, Mr Acting Deputy President, I'm bringing these things forward in this small part of the toing and froing of politics to highlight the hypocrisy of the ALP in what they're accusing this government of, when on the few occasions they made decisions, they actually sent work in this very field offshore. I challenge members opposite to consider how much of the Valley of Death would have been avoided if the ALP government had taken a decision to build the landing craft here in Australia as opposed to sending them off to Spain. So I concur this is a serious issue, but it is rank hypocrisy for the ALP to say that the problem we face today is a product of the coalition over the last few months. The broader issues that we should be debating in this place to make sure that we put in place a framework that will be good for our national security, that will be good for our defence industry, is actually understanding capability development for defence and how the government and the department and industry should be collaborating to make sure that we have a sustainable and viable capability. Now, I use that word capability advisedly. Defence has a process. They talk about FIX, fundamental inputs to capability. And so if we want to have an air combat capability, that is more than just the aircraft. You need to have a training system for the people. You need to have a training system for the maintenance folk. You need to have a support system for spare parts. You need to have airfields, the whole lot. People, organisations, support, training, equipment and doctrine are all required. Now, one of the missing pieces in that construct is defence industry. Governments of both persuasions over the years have not directed or engaged with defence to have them consider as a formal part of their FIC process defence industry. And we see that manifested by the fact that industry division, so-called, within defence has sat in a number of places, but it doesn't sit with the Capability Development Group. And the Capability Development Group, or CDG, are the ones who bring to government at first pass not only the strategic requirement for the equipment, what kind of, well, we use the word capabilities, what kind of characteristics should it have, they also bring to government advice around the procurement approach, how they should acquire that. Their thinking does not include at this stage, from a long-term perspective, what are the industrial, design engineering, design support, manufacturing capabilities that we need to maintain onshore as a sovereign nation. Now, let's not get into the simplistic argument, as often occurs here, where people fold their arms and say, we'll never again build jet aircraft in this country. Why are you talking about building things onshore? Well, Mr. Acting Deputy President, there are countless examples where we see the requirement to have competence, particularly in the area of design assurance, design engineering, fabrication, repair, design, enacting repairs here in Australia. If we don't have those, we run the risk of more things like the collapse of the amphibious fleet. For those who aren't familiar with that, it was because Navy got rid of their engineering capability, and it was outsourced, it was given to the DMO, who outsourced to industry, and there was nobody keeping watch on the quality of what was being delivered and the ships. Now, that has cost Australia dearly in terms of our ability to respond to natural disasters, our ability to support other ships afloat, and it has cost through the whole RISO process, and it's still costing Defence money as we try and rebuild that engineering capability. And so it's important that we map a path forward to maintain in this area of shipbuilding, in the area of aerospace, in the area of electronic warfare, the high-end engineering competencies, the high-end manufacturing competencies, the large infrastructure requirements. It's important that Defence maps a path forward so that those remain viable. Now, that doesn't mean we do everything. That doesn't mean that we try and have orphan systems here in Australia and we don't link into global supply chains. But it does mean that at first pass, what should be happening is that the Capability Development Group should have as one of their considerations of a fundamental input to that capability, meaning the ability to perform that function on behalf of government over the next 2 to 3 decades, an understanding of what skills, competencies and capacities our industry is required to have. If we were doing that, then each time Defence came to government at first pass to put before them a strategic need for the piece of equipment, they would also be bringing to government, wrapped up in that proposal, the strategic plan for sustaining those elements of defence industry capability and capacity that we believed were essential to maintaining our sovereignty as a nation. And that goes directly to this issue of shipbuilding and maintaining the shipbuilding industry. If governments of both persuasions in the past had done that, we would not be where we are today. The inaction of the last 6 years is inexcusable, but it doesn't stand alone because the system has had this flaw in it for many years. We do have an opportunity to fix this and move forward. There are ways that we can start to remediate the issues. C-1000, Future Submarine, is a classic case. The Liberal Party is committed to South Australia as a place to build those submarines. But are we going to build 12 submarines, as per the 2009 White Paper, that's either a new design or unproven, with a complete step up from the current Collins class? That's the current thinking of block replacement for fleets that the public talk about, the media talk about, and that Defence put forward to government. There is a far smarter way. The more intelligent way that looks at this capability from a long-term perspective would be to say, if we are to build critical skills in engineering, marine architects, design, systems integration, propulsion, manufacturing, then we will take the service life extension program for the Collins class and we will gradually ramp that up to the point where we have mature and well-functioning systems for each of the major systems, whether it be the hotel services, the ship management services, the combat system, the external sensors, things like getting the whole centre of gravity right, the propulsion system right. By doing that through the Service Life Extension program, we actually reinvigorate the design, the manufacturer, the welders, all of those things that we need to be able to step up that next notch to C1000. And what you would then see is a continuous and seamless workforce and building of capacity and competence so that we actually reduce the risk and therefore the cost of future projects. At the moment we have this stop-start basis where we have high risk, that increases cost, and we see people ramping up to try and make production schedules to keep in line with this concept of a time-limited project. Whereas if we had a program, the peak numbers would not be as high, but then again you wouldn't have the troughs, the valley of deaths either. You would have lower risk, lower cost, and you would iteratively develop your capabilities. If we're talking submarines, we're talking better boats at each iteration of that submarine, and we transition from the extended Collins into the C1000 boat, and many of the systems, many of the skill sets of those who are supporting it would roll across. The benefit of that is not only have we reduced the risk and therefore the cost, but we also will have a design with more integrity, which means that the mean time between failure for critical systems such as the propulsion and combat systems and others will be increased. Now, the flow and effect of that is that the availability of boats in the water will be significantly enhanced. And so, if you try and understand why the 2009 White Paper said 12 boats, it was probably based on the current metrics that says if you want one boat in the water, you need to have 2, probably 3, is around world's best practice. And so to have 4 to 5 to 6 boats in the water, they thought you'd need 12. But if you have a design that is more reliable, so your mean time between failure is greater, you understand the systems better so that your full cycle docking times are less, if your upgrade paths are more recurrent and iterative, then you will probably find you never need to build 12 boats in order to have 6 continuously available in the water. And that alone brings efficiencies and savings to the taxpayer, as well as operational capability to our Defence Force. So, Mr Acting Deputy President, I concur with the intent of Senator Carr's bill to raise attention to the fact that, or his motion, to raise attention to the fact that shipbuilding is important. But I highlight the fact that there are long-term considerations that we need to get right, as opposed to having this short-term party political argument that ignores the bigger issues that will actually set us up to have a sustainable industry that avoids the valley of death. They're the arguments we should be having. They're the things we should be working on more collaboratively to put in place for the benefit of Australia. To Senator Carr's perspective and his position that the government should be deciding right now, well, I highlight yet again the projects that are occurring right now, the Air Warfare Destroyer and the LHD. The decisions on those projects were taken more than 8 years ago. So if we wanted a project to be running next year or the year after, people actually cutting metal, welding, integrating systems, those decisions had to be made well before the current government. There is a way forward. I believe it's the iterative upgrade path with things like the Collins-class submarine moving into C1000. But I would encourage senators in this place to avoid the overt and shallow party political bickering on an issue that is so important to our national security, that is so important to the men and women in the economy of South Australia. This bill, or this motion, is clearly political in nature, which is why clearly this government's not going to support it, but it raises important issues. And I would just implore senators from both sides in this place on these important issues to lift their sights above the grubby party political and to look at the long-term interest of our nation.